Hey, it's Terry with Something Spooky, and in this video we're going to be talking about Friday the 13th, the 2009 reboot directed by Marcus Nispel. So this is an interesting case because I've always liked this movie and I've always defended it as a horror remake, one of the better horror remakes. This was, of course, when we were getting a lot of them in the mid-2000s into 2010s. You know, we had Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Prom Night and My Bloody Valentine and on and on. And of all of them, I think Friday the 13th is near the top of that list. It definitely is much better than something like the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, but it may not be quite as good as something like the Texas Chainsaw or maybe even Halloween remake, but it's in that upper echelon. And I've always defended it for that. What I think is interesting about the movie is that it is basically the prototype Friday the 13th movie that had never really existed before. I read a lot of reviews for this film, and a lot of the critics were saying that it didn't add anything new to the franchise, and that it, this was just kind of like rehashing all of the same things. And while that's kind of true, it's also doing it in a very competent, packaged way that hadn't really been present in the franchise. The closest we had probably got to it was Friday the 13th 3, in my opinion. But of course, the original movie, Friday the 13th, 1980, was not a Jason movie. It did not feature Jason or a lot of the tropes that people associate with it now. It did introduce a lot of the kind of feel and the camp counselor vibe and all of that, but it doesn't have Jason in it at all. Spoilers. Friday the 13th Part 2 does have Jason, but of course he's a very different Jason than the Jason that we know. Now he has the bag, or he has the bag on his head in that movie, so it's just not the same kind of feel. Friday the 13th Part 3 is the first time we kind of get the real Jason movie that this reboot is most emulating, but it doesn't stick around for long because in Friday the 13th 4 and 5 you start to get into all the different stuff with Tommy and all these different kind of weird angles, and then by Friday the 13th Part 6, it's really, getting zany, which is actually my favorite in the franchise, but it's a different kind of thing than where it had started. And of course, it kind of keeps going off the rails from there with the later entries in the franchise. But this movie is a return to form for the franchise, but it's a form that the franchise had never really truly achieved before. It's the most kind of polished, straightforward presentation of Jason in the whole franchise, arguably. And it's held, or it's done by pretty competent hands. Marcus Nispel, the director, had directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot, which I think is probably the best of all of these horror reboots. So he's back in form here, and then the writers are from the Freddy vs. Jason movie. So it's people who knew what they were doing with this, and when you read about the making and production of it, there was a lot of passion that went into making this the movie that it is, and they really thought everything out about how they wanted to do it, when they wanted to do it, and why they wanted to do it. And it's evident in the movie. What is interesting for me is that coming back to it after having these positive opinions about it for a long time, I watched it in a double feature with the original film the other night, and I think it was the first time that I had ever watched those back to back. And watching them back to back is a very odd comparison and not totally a favorable comparison for the reboot. It was kind of the most I had ever not enjoyed the reboot because it does just seem to be lacking something in the spirit of that original. And I think it has a lot to do with the tension that's in that original movie that you just don't really feel in the reboot. And also the characters, while they're still like comedic and there are supposed to be funny moments, there is something, and a lot of reviews say this, that just kind of misses the mark in the way that the series feels in the reboot. It just doesn't feel as authentic, and I think one review said giddy, and that's true, where it's just like the original films just have this kind of like sense of momentum and fun that I think the reboot kind of struggles to achieve. But I put that aside once I went back to evaluate it once more, and I really do think that it is one of the most competent reboots and recognize that it's just doing things that the series has never really packaged fully together before. It is a tribute to the first 4 films in particular, Friday the 13th, Part 1 through 4. And I think when you think of it like that, it makes a lot of sense that they are packaging that version of the character and that part of the franchise together and kind of just giving it in the most distilled way possible. I think it does live up to that, and it's also still just a fun slasher movie on its own, especially for that kind of 2000s time period. It feels like that kind of slasher movie done in a well-done way too, so they did manage to update it for modern audiences in an effective way. Overall, I still really liked the movie. It was just interesting to come back to it and kind of evaluate it in all these different lenses now that it is also, more than 10 years old. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to follow Something Spooky for more. Thanks.